Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche organization with your daily video update for March 4th, 2024. Let me begin by saying that there were some very significant developments over the last few days. And while we have no definitive assessment yet, it's clear there's a remarkable shift underway on all strategic fronts. And I'm going to review some of the developments to give you a picture of what we're looking at. But what it makes clear is that this is the time when intervention by citizens will have a maximum effect. The desperation is obvious in the establishment when it comes to the Ukraine war, as well as to the Israeli Netanyahu genocide in Gaza. These developments show that there's a great deal of uncertainty as to how to proceed, especially given the indications that the war in Ukraine is lost and that the intent by Netanyahu to carry out a depopulation of Gaza is running into major opposition. So let me run through these developments to give you a sense of what we're looking at and what you should be paying attention to, and more importantly, why you should be organizing with us to support the move to a new strategic and development architecture, because now is the time, unlike in any recent period, when the action of citizens will make a difference. So let's start with some of the more ominous developments. The leaked discussion between German military officials about how to proceed with an attack on Russia. And what's clear in the discussion is that, and these are top officials in the Air Force, that it was clear to them that something had to change, that there was a need to strike Russia. What came up in the discussion in particular was how to hit the Kerch Bridge in Crimea. And the fear they had is that how can you do it without having obvious German involvement? So this goes back to the discussion last week of Macron, the French president, who talked about that it's time to consider NATO boots on the ground in Ukraine. Now, why is this the case? Well, the Washington Post and the New York Times both have articles today about how the Ukraine army has been depleted, and Zelensky and his top aides have no solutions, no obvious answers for recruits to beef up the Ukrainian army, which has been devastated by the continuation of the proxy war against Russia. And so we see Macron posing the idea that we should not take off the table the possibility of NATO troops going in. From discussions among other circles, including an article in Le Monde on Friday, including the leaks from the German military, there is talk about other nations' involvement in Ukraine, and the German generals mentioned 3 nations involved. This could be very clearly UK, France, and the United States involved with forces inside Ukraine. So the German generals were discussing, given that Scholz has proposed no Taurus missiles, how could you have long-range missiles operating in Ukraine to hit Russian targets without German technicians, German military, running the operations? And so they talk about possibly coming by car from Poland and all sorts of other ideas. But the point is clear that from a military standpoint, there's desperation. Russia has won the war. Now the question is, can this war be continued until the November US elections? Because if it's not, if there's a diplomatic solution, the Republicans will say Biden lost Ukraine. Now, there's another aspect to this, which is that you have, on the one hand, the Putin discussion with Tucker Carlson, where he said, look, there's no indication that the West has a diplomatic solution. But he said that Russia would be open to a diplomatic resolution. So what does that mean? Who do you negotiate with? That was a question Putin asked. Who can we talk to? Now, it's also worth noting that Chancellor Scholz despite being a limp rag in the hands of NATO officials, did come out and say no Taurus missiles and no German boots on the ground in Ukraine. So the fight is going to continue inside NATO as to whether, if the situation is lost, what could be done. Don't leave out the prospect of a false flag that would be a basis for saying now we have to send NATO troops in there. But the other sign of a shift coming was the speech given by someone who's otherwise a non-entity. Kamala Harris, the Vice President of the United States, gave a talk in Selma, Alabama on Sunday at the commemoration of the Edmund Pettus Bridge confrontation between civil rights activists and Alabama police many, many years ago, the famous incident at the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And what Harris said is the following. She said, "We need an immediate ceasefire." Now remember, the Biden administration has been opposed to using the term ceasefire, but she said we need an immediate ceasefire. She described the situation in Gaza as devastating. Too many innocent Palestinians have been killed. And she said there's an immense scale of suffering, unquote. Now, this is true, but where the hell has she been? This has been going on since early October of last year. The scale of suffering has been extreme. Nearly 2 million people displaced from homes, 30,000 minimally killed, as many as 500,000 people facing starvation, according to UN figures, including largely children and mothers. So why did Harris suddenly get sent out to present this at an important rally? Well, think of the events of the last days. In the Michigan primary, undecided, which means or uncommitted, in other words, no vote for Biden in the Democratic primary, over 100,000 votes, 10%, rejected Biden as the nominee. This comes as a New York Times poll came out showing that 73% of those who voted for Biden in 2020 think he's, quote, too old, unquote, to be effective. So a clear turn against Biden, a rejection. And why was the vote for the unconfirmed or uncommitted in Michigan so high? The issue was Biden's commitment to Netanyahu, that is U.S. support for the genocide underway in Gaza. Then you had the event of the Aaron Bushnell self-immolation, which sparked a sense among many people that something more should be done. Not necessarily suicide, but something had to be done about this when a U.S. airman sets himself on fire to protest events on the ground. Then you also have the intervention of Brazil's President Lula, very powerful condemnation of Netanyahu, who he accused of carrying out a Hitler-style genocide against the Palestinians. And then you have Trump virtually consolidating the Republican nomination and the great fear that has engendered in the pro-war faction. Now, look, admittedly, Trump seems to be siding with Netanyahu in Israel. So the fact that he's not fully anti-war is a big question mark hanging over him. But the fact that he's spoken against NATO, that he has spoken against the Ukraine war, that the Republican Party is blocking more money to go to Ukraine in the U.S. Congress, these are all part of the question marks as to what will U.S. policy be. So as I said, there's no definitive conclusion, but a lot of indications that a change may be coming. Now, the problem is how to do that before the November election. The Republicans have been unwilling to do more than just snipe at Biden and shut down the funds to Ukraine, but they're totally committed to the funds to Israel, $14 billion to Israel. So within the political establishment, there's no alternative. But now we're seeing protests all over the world to this war policy. The neocons are out on a limb. They're committed to the proxy war against Russia and Ukraine and to the support for Netanyahu for his attempt to exterminate Hamas and in the process drive the Palestinians out of Gaza. That's his solution to the problem that he faces with a two-state response. So while there's a lot that's unclear where it's going, what is clear is that there are jitters in the establishment. And what are they most afraid of? They're afraid of you. The fact that the people in the West may decide that they've had enough of this war, enough of austerity, enough of a destruction of the physical economy with the green agenda and the sanctions policy and the high prices and the inflation. Enough, enough, enough. But the problem is making that clear. And what's necessary is to identify that the enemy is the corporate cartels that are the neocons and neolibs in the West, and that their policy is permanent warfare. And the alternative is to get a diplomatic resolution to Ukraine and to the Israel-Palestinian situation, which requires for the latter the Oasis plan of LaRouche. That is an economic plan that will be for the mutual benefit of the competing parties. Now, that's a break with the old geopolitics, the British imperial design of geopolitics to divide countries against each other to allow the empire to come in over the top. That's the solution, to break that. And that's what I'm calling on all of our viewers to become totally familiar with the LaRouche Oasis plan, with Helga Zepp LaRouche's 10 fundamental principles, so that we have a strategy that's not merely negative, not merely anti-war, but a positive reaffirmation of the potential of human beings to resolve these kinds of problems by moving to a higher level of cooperation for economic development. So thanks for joining me today. I'll see you again tomorrow.